shallow void.
Ryan, it actually seems like I just saw you like 2 months ago, but it's been like, I think 2 years since the last time I saw you.
Man, when did we? Oh, we saw each other in Denver at that festival.
Yeah. That's almost 2 years ago.
Yeah, man. Whew, that's crazy.
At a live event that was attended by quite a few people. So
yeah, it was easy flying and hanging out with people, and yeah, it was wild. That was maybe the last like show I flew to. I think I can't remember. Yeah, it's hard to like, my timeline is like totally off for the last 2 years.
I think I might add that my timeline is off even within days of each other, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like week to week, like Monday through Saturday, everything just seems like time is in a weird warp right now.
Yeah. I'll get like slightly like tense because I feel like some email hasn't been responded to, and I'll feel like it's been a month, and I look and I'm like, oh, it's been like 3 days. Like between Monday and Friday always seems like a really long time to me lately. It's very odd.
Yeah, definitely. Have you been vaccinated? Just a question I've been asking a lot of people these days.
I have, yeah. I got my second shot, the Pfizer vaccine, last Thursday, and it's Wednesday as we record this. So it's been just about a week, and I didn't really have any side effects. Like I felt like a little weird, like kind of like creeping tingle in a couple spots in my body, like that day and the next day, and then was like exercising a few days later and could tell that I was like tired, like I couldn't get a full breath. But other than that, I was okay.
That's good, man. It's rolling out, and I think it's good. I mean, we're trying to turn a corner on this thing, and I'm hopeful that sooner or later, hopefully by the fall, like there'll be some sort of live experiences going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm. It's like one of those things. Like I don't know when. I guess the numbers are down enough everywhere that somebody can deem that open. And it's funny because in certain circles, not our world, but in like these kind of regular bar goer, local cover band things, that shit's still going on a lot of places. It's going on here. I mean, it's been going on here almost the whole time. And that's very weird to like see this, because it seems so surreal, because people that are being responsible and that see this as a worldwide scenario, they don't partake in that. But people that just live their life like in a few mile radius, like a lot of them been living the same way. And it's kind of wild to see.
Just raging full on with no masks or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah. I mean, it's been weird. And, Kentucky's been okay overall and handled it pretty well, but like that shit's super weird. And it's a weird feeling. I mean, I don't know. Like I know New York's been in like a very different scenario than here, but like it feels really fucked up when you're like, I gave up my entire life, my mission as a human being to like, for the greater good. And then you just see these people just like going on about it like nothing's happening. And it's hard. It's hard to not feel like, why can't I do that? And it's hard to know when to return to it. And I don't know, it's fucking weird.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. Like about a year ago, I moved out to New Jersey, and
okay,
it's Jersey's kind of a mixed bag of super right wing types and progressive kind of left leaning people, and down where our practice space is, it's in a town that's, it's like 50-50, I would say. You see like Trump flags and all that stuff. And I remember like Saturday night, leaving practice, and there's like a coffee place down in the town part. And I did like a quick turn into the town, and I drove through the main drag, and there were like people like on the sidewalks, like spilling out from these places. And I was like, no masks. I'm like, motherfucker, I just canceled the tour with Napalm Death. And like, you guys are out there like, like it's, like his life is normal. It's so
Right.
fucked up, man. So I could totally relate to what you're saying on that level.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody is saying this, and like, I don't want to like become redundant in other things I've said elsewhere, but like, I just think for most people, the world is the world is there is like a really small place. It's like I think for most Americans and maybe everybody everywhere, it's like you're so focused on your town, your neighborhood, and if you go on a trip, you go to like very obvious places, like you go to fucking Florida or you go to Las Vegas, and I think for people like us, the world is so small in your perception because we have friends everywhere and we've traveled everywhere that like for us this was a worldwide thing to like try to do better, and a lot of things that that affect the world and affect humans we see as like a worldwide thing, and I just think most people just can't see that. Most people don't have the comprehension of that, maybe because they haven't been taught that. I don't know, that's part of that like xenophobia too, I guess. But yeah, it's weird, man. It's been a weird thing to like see how little people care in that like grand scheme.
I also noticed, since you and I haven't seen you in person, I've been, checking out your Instagram over the last like 12 months, and you've been very active. I see with a lot of the political stuff that's going on, or has been going on, especially towards the end of 2020, and all the protests and all that. There was a lot of that stuff in New York as well. I mean, I only know people like you in Louisville, and I don't have a feel, I guess, for the overarching vibe of people down in Kentucky. But how has it been living in the Midwest, and like having all this kind of unrest going on? Like, how has that affected you, like, personally?
I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat in some ways, in that I only know who I know, right? Like I only know my friends and my family, and I see other people, and I try to learn from them and have some concept of their lives, but I only have my own perspective, and I think the thing for me is like that there's not. I am not affected by any of this shit. Like if I wanted to stay in my home, I'm not affected by anything. I'm not affected by racism. I'm only affected by the pandemic, and that like my touring world was taken away, and I can't, I don't go to the fucking movies anymore or whatever. But like, so I think there's this concept from a lot of people in Louisville who aren't touched by any struggles in life and aren't oppressed, and see a lot of like, there's a lot of fear on their side, and there's a lot of like this concept that like there was this massive unrest and this massive destruction of like our downtown and things like that, and like a lot of businesses that went out of business because of the pandemic. It's been blamed on the movement for Black Lives, which is like just another form of insidious racism. It's like there's a worldwide pandemic. Of course, lots of businesses are going to close, but there'll be this perception if you drive downtown, you see an empty storefront. Oh, that closed because of this. And that's not the case. And I think, like I'm saying about having a worldwide perspective, I mean, of course I knew there was racism in Louisville, and I knew that our police force was fucked up, but I had this idea that we lived in like a more progressive city, and we don't. Like even our Democratic governor, he's just another, Democratic mayor, he's just another politician. He's just another old rich white dude. When people started protesting, he sent in the National Guard and they fucking killed people, so that was eye-opening to me, and I did try to be involved. I went to a lot of protests and went to a lot of marches, and I raised a lot of money through my outlets and things like that. And I tried to do as much as I could, but it's one of those weird things. Of course, like when I'm tired, I come back home to my house. Right. And it's that thing where like, as a white activist, you can like still turn it off. You still have that like ease of life, that privilege that a lot of people don't. So, I've tried to do as much good as I could. But it was interesting. It was interesting to see like how people perceived it and how brutal the police force was and uncaring and continues to be. And how through it all, despite the fact that we were maybe one of the two biggest focuses of the movement last year with Breonna Taylor's murder, there still was not much change. It's like outside of George Floyd, like everybody's eyes were on us, and our state and local government didn't do much. They did some platitudes and they did some small things, and then they just kind of went back to business as usual, which is usually like firing people and shuffling them around and shit like that, and like putting new faces at the head of organizations that essentially stay the same. And so that's been frustrating, and it's been eye-opening, but I don't know. I mean, I've been really inspired by and like proud of how many people have come out and how much of a movement there was here locally, because it is a pretty sleepy town. So that's been inspiring to see. And there's still a lot of people out there like putting feet on the ground on a regular basis. And that's really inspiring to see as well.
Yeah. It's like the end of 2020 or all of 2020 really, until recently, just up until now, I would say it's been a real eye opener. 'Cause a lot of the issues that are coming to the forefront, that are percolating to the surface, as a kind of, I'll say it, I'm like a pretty clueless, politically clueless white guy. I have like, my ideas about, being a Democrat and living in a democratically, run country with a constitution and all this sort of stuff. But a lot of these things that we're dealing with, I'm surprised in the 21st century are still fucking issues, man. And it's really disappointing. And I guess like one of the takeaways that I have from the last 12 months or so, 16 months, is just that you can't really pretend things are okay in this country. Otherwise, you're just going to get lulled into sleep, and then the other is going to take over and take everything away from you, and you're going to be back living in like the 1800s. It's going to be like,
right.
And that's really, I guess, created a lot of issues for me personally within within my family, number one, and it's just like an awakening, I guess, for me, because I have never really been very political, but now just being aware, I guess, is more of what is the takeaway from all this stuff,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good. I think it's good that people had their eyes opened, and like you're saying, I mean, we could see it go back so quickly, and then there are other people like, people that are oppressed, to whatever extent, like black people or women or whatever, that are still living with the remnants of that, of the late 1800s, and things like that like you can't just push your way out of poverty. And that's like the American idea that everybody can do that. And like, if you start at, if one person starts at 0 and the other person starts at -50,
yeah,
they don't have the same way to get to 10. And yeah, and the other thing is like you're saying about being a Democrat, like those kind of things, I think that's another sea change we need, because we've gone back to, and I'm feeling more at ease in the last few months, but like we've just gone back to the status quo. We've gone back to the exact same shit of like these old fucking white capitalist middle of the road dudes. I mean, that like it lulls us into submission because we're like, but it's just not that constant chaos. But sometimes I like the devil you can see more than the devil you can't, right? Like it's like, in some ways, it's like I'd rather be everybody be active and aware and angry than how they are sometimes during your Clintons or your Bidens or whatever, where it's like, oh, everything's cool, but like it's still not fucking cool, and it's not changing for black and brown people, and it, you know, and there's still mass detention and mass incarceration and things like that. And so that's one of the things with America is that like I've been thinking a lot about like Democrats. I'm like, Democrats should be our enemy, but Republicans are so so insane that like that Democrats have to be our friends. Like we should be looking at the policies. I mean, to me, as like a person who is conceptually like progressive, like this, we should see the very centrist policies of like Democrats as being ridiculous, and we should be fighting against those for something that's way more progressive. But there's still that insane conservative mindset. So like that shit is just mind blowing to me. But I don't know. I've been watching a lot of like documentaries on cults lately.
Oh yeah.
And,
Mm-hmm.
and it's funny because you just see how insane this shit seems. But you're like, when the baseline in this country is that everybody believes in old time religion and everybody believes in, every kid is taught to believe in Santa Claus growing up, like, and everybody believes in Jesus. Like, why wouldn't you? You're taught that Jesus will come back, so you're looking for it. It's like, why wouldn't? Heaven's Gate is no more ridiculous than the Mormons, which is no more ridiculous than Scientology and Christianity and all that shit. So all those kind of things, I just think we're like, maybe the world, but certainly America is built on this weird fucking fantasy. It's crazy.
Well,
man.
yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, now we're delving into, the fact that this is probably some kind of Masonic, experiment that happened, like, when our forefathers fled Europe to come here, and whatever kind of like arcane ideologies this country was based on around that time. I mean, a lot of that stuff I feel like is embedded like in America, and,
Right.
and more so that like I have the feeling that this whole thing is a fucking work, man. Like, I lay awake at night sometimes and I think about like, okay, we got these figureheads that are like presidents, and then behind the scenes is another group of people who are like, all right, we're going to give you this guy for 4 years as long as we get this other guy for 8 years, and then you can go back to having your guy for 4 years, and then there's like some other agenda that's going on,
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that I think it is very clear, but I think it's like less, for me personally, my opinion is that it's less like, I don't know what, like, yeah, less like a specific group of people and more just like the concept of capitalism, and that like there isn't a conspiracy. It is a way of life. It is a concept of living that we are actively a part of, and it's capitalism. And it's not just, and I'm not like an absolute anti-capitalist. But like it's capitalism run amok, right? So it's just who donates the most money and who gets the most tax benefits and who gets this and who gets that and who gets control of Taiwan and who gets control of this and like that kind of shit is like, yeah, we're just flipping the same coin back and forth, and I don't know, I mean, I think Biden is a way better person than Trump, but like, we're still tossing the beanbag back and forth between like the same type of people, and I don't know. And I also like, this isn't even maybe something I should bring up, but like personally, I'm like extremely anti-gun. And that's another thing that I feel like it's intrinsic in America. I'm not denying that it's part of America and it's part of our rights and it's part of what the country is based on. So to like, sometimes I feel like arguing it is as pointless as arguing about the existence of the country. But like, I see that as part of the problem too, where like everybody's armed and the police are armed and everybody's afraid, everybody has a gun. And, I'm like, yeah, that kind of shit is just mind blowing to me, how that's just like an never ending like circle of, maybe if like, I don't know, it's just fucking crazy. We're just in a world where like somebody can walk into a movie theater and shoot me, or any show or whatever. And it's like happens over and over again and nothing occurs and nothing changes. And that's crazy to me too. And I don't know, I haven't really thought about this either, but like the fact that like the George Floyd trial is a death that doesn't involve a gun is also interesting, that how high profile it is and like how this guy's cops actually being put on trial, but it's not a firearm related thing, which is interesting to me. And like I don't know. I wonder if there's some kind of concept there where like that like skirts that issue too, I don't know.
I never thought of that actually. And, that's a really interesting point, but that's something I never considered.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the Dante Wright shooting that just happened. It's like, we're like, this cop says she thought she had a taser, and everyone's like, "What the fuck?" We all know, a child would know the difference between a taser and a gun, but like, why is the gun right there? Why is the gun on one side and the taser on the other side? Like, why can't the gun be in the trunk, and I understand that like the cops think that it's because they think everybody's armed, and they think in particular every black man is armed, and that's what they're taught to believe, and that kind of shit. I'm just like, where do we break that cycle? I don't know. That's like, and that's one thing where I have to understand that like gun violence really, really, really freaks me out, because it affects directly things that I do, like go to movies and go to events and stuff like that. And so when that shit happens is when I want to escape America most of all. And I have to realize that like for people who are oppressed and poor and minorities, like they're living with that type of feeling I have like every fucking day. Right. So I don't know, that's wild. And that's privilege too for me, is I'm like, oh man, somebody was, some fucking dude annihilated a Las Vegas event with a machine gun, I want to move away, like, and it's like, there are people that are like living under some extent of that type of violence or fear, like all the fucking time. And most of the time I can turn it off.
Yeah. They don't have the option of just moving either. You're just
Right.
kind of stuck in your neighborhood, and that's it,
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, it's weird, man. It's like, and I'm not like super conspiratorial, but it's interesting to think how easy this all, how smoothly the world goes along, particularly the States, considering how fucked up it is. You know what I mean? Like how like you can just go to Qdoba and get a burrito and come home and you can do all these things. I mean, even through the pandemic, it's like, I see people that really fucking hated mask mandates and shutdowns. And I just think like, God damn, you still had it pretty good. Like the water was still running, the power was still on. Like, it's like, it's just crazy how well this thing runs, and that enables the atrocities that occur to keep happening and to be pushed way down, because the daily mechanisms work pretty well.
Yeah, that's the thing, man. It's there was that big panic in the beginning that the toilet paper
Right.
shortage and everything. That things were we were gonna have to like defend ourselves and stock up on food and all this stuff, and that never really manifested. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like any kind of shortage was a perceived shortage, just because suddenly everyone bought everything and they didn't have time to restock the shelves, really. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, the power was on. Everyone had Netflix. Everyone had their Wi-Fi. Their secure logins for their work and all that. And
Yeah.
most people weren't really affected, except for the ones people who had a job where they actually had to show up. Like if you were a a sanitation worker or something like that, or you had to be out in public, and
Right.
you didn't have the option of staying home or working from home.
Yeah. And certainly tons of people were affected. I mean, I know, obviously both of us know so many people, like just within our own infrastructure of music, like, my brother's a screen printer and mainly screen prints for bands. And then that's just like stops, like just like snap your fingers. It's gone. It's like fucking, the Avengers. It's like Thanos, it's like, like that whole world that's set up for that, booking agents and music venues and everything. That's fucking crazy. So shit definitely went down and shit was horrible. And obviously millions of people died, but it's still interesting that how well most of society has trucked onward despite this, which is kind of reassuring. But then there's shit like that winter storm in Texas where they lose power for like 3 or 4 days or a week. And it's just total fucking insanity, people dying and freezing to death. And it's a fragile system. It's very, very wild.
A couple episodes ago, I had Cece from Zucchini Kill on. And
Okay.
Do you know that place in Austin?
I've seen you posting about it, but that's all I know about it.
Yeah, it's great, vegan bakery, coffee shop place. They cater, they do mail order, that kind of stuff. But she's a Texas native and had to deal with that whole thing. And we did, half an episode talking about the failure of the state, basically. So that's definitely something. I got a pretty big education about that failure.
I'll have to check that out. I mean, and it was wild. Like a few days after all that kind of settled down, like I heard an interview on NPR with, I don't know, like the head of one of the Texas utility companies, and that I had no concept at the time until then that they had to make the decision to shut the power down, which is also just, just wild. Like you can't withstand a fucking snowstorm and you have to consciously decide to shut the power grid down is like unreal. I always wonder that too, man. Everybody sees, Obama as like this cool dad, cool buddy. And there's that Obama, Bruce Springsteen podcast now and shit like that. And I just think, if I met this dude, I would love to ask him point blank, how do you feel about authorizing the murder of hundreds or thousands of people? Like, how do you fucking sleep at night? Like, that's just fucking mind blowing to me. I don't know that these guys are just dudes in in Gap jeans, on TV, just being pals. And I'm like, you have to, you authorize extrajudicial, I can't even say the word, but, outside of, killings outside of the law and bombings. And I just can't even fucking imagine that, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's the funny thing is after the shitstorm of having Donald Trump in president for the last 4 years and just the 3-ring circus aspect of that it's almost like no one remembers all of the negative stuff that happened between with the Democratic Party. And I mean, hell, we haven't had a Republican even win a popular vote since 2004 or something like that. You know what I mean? But everyone's just, Joe Biden, he's going to save everything, or Obama, that was a real president. I mean, the guy didn't insult people, and you weren't, afraid for these fringe right-wing enablement that went on during Trump's watch. But you can't just revise the past to fit your narrative. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. I mean, we saw that in recent years where people saw George W. Bush as this kindly old granddad, and it's just what the fuck are you thinking? And that's selective memory, but it's interesting, man. Yeah, and I think we were all dying to get back to that what's the word, functional statesman, functional diplomat type of life. But you gotta you got to still see that for what it is and see how fucked up that is. And yeah, I don't know, man. But I do feel, and I almost feel guilty for it. I do feel so much calmer since Biden was inaugurated because there's not that particular kind of constant chaos in the news and and people just seem to have, in some regard, mellowed out, and it just kind of has mellowed out my brain activity on a daily basis, which is helpful.
Yeah, but what's scarier though is I almost feel like I felt back in the late '80s with like Nazi skinheads around, except that they're not at shows; they're actually out in public with people.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like that's the real scary part about Donald Trump is that all these like crackpot right wing fringe militia types are somehow empowered right now, and they're it's almost mainstream to have these extremist views.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's terrifying to me, in the 21st century that is what we're dealing with in this country,
Yeah, it's insane, man. I see a lot of that like in media, like in I don't know, like I've seen a lot more like Nazis and stuff in like pop culture as the villains again lately. And like that show The Boys, they brought that character in like that. And it's interesting because I think people like me and you, we came up with seeing these raw cult movies like Romper Stomper or like, I'm spacing on the one with Tim Roth where he's a skinhead.
Football hooligan.
Yeah. It's like that trilogy. Scum is one of the other ones, but, Made in Britain is what it's called. But we grew up with all that shit and we kind of like loved those movies because they were so raw and crazy, but we saw obviously we saw those people as the villains and we didn't identify with it. But after a certain extent, I start to think like, fucking Nazis are watching American History X and love it, like
absolutely.
And sometimes I feel like the more they're there, even as a cartoon character, it just it makes it a little bit more accepted, a little bit less threatening, and I don't know, I don't accept that, like I don't know, I feel like more of a responsibility to draw a line in the sand more often, because I think a lot of times we do become complacent because we know where we stand, and like these days, like if a new band approaches Shirt Killer or something, I like scroll through their Instagram and I'm like, well, if there's nothing anti-racist on here, maybe they're racist. I don't fucking know.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Like shit like that. So, and I had a little experience of like on the second Fotocrime European tour where I've made this shirt that was like an Art Deco eagle. It was actually from like a post office, like an old U.S. post office, but it was like, a very like, it had a little bit of a Third Reich look. It was like a very angular, eagle drawing. It said Fotocrime, and I think it was like a line from a song. It said Global Evacuation Route, and my idea was that it looked kind of like those old 80s Boy shirts, which is Boy was a London brand that very much directly used Nazi imagery, but was not a Nazi thing. But also this concept of like it coming from the post office imagery and like this idea of escaping America and shit like that. But anyway, this dude that I kind of loosely knew came up to me and was like, I want to know about this shirt. Like, is this white power imagery? Like, this isn't fucking cool. There's, this is not acceptable. Like, we don't deal with this. And it was a little bit of like I don't know. It was odd because I just felt like take 2 seconds and look at who I am before you try to call me out. But at the same time, I was like, every person that comes to a Fotocrime show doesn't know every fucking thing about me. They don't know that I'm an active anti-racist and an activist to some extent, and that I raise funds for anti-racist organizations, and I make anti-racist shirts, and then and they don't know everything about me. They just come to the show and they see the shirts and they see the band. And not that I have to like say that I'm anti-fascist on every fucking shirt I make, but like it did remind me that like these things are important, and that when you chip away at it and every statement you make, I think it helps to tear that shit down, because that's kind of where that's maybe, or for me, like that's where I grew up and understood that stuff through punk and hardcore. Like it taught me that shit. And like, if all the bands kind of hadn't been chipping away at that, I might not have caught that, like there are plenty of racist Black Flag fans or whoever, and like, and that's, to me, that's like antithetical. Like those things don't work together, but for a lot of people it does, because I don't know. So it kind of taught me a lesson, I guess, that like I need to be clear in where I stand on things, especially in these days.
Was that in Germany by any chance?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're like, that's that's the epicenter of European fascism.
Exactly.
So yeah, there you go. But I mean, I the Germans, in my opinion, because they hosted the Third Reich, like
right.
They kind of get a pass for being sensitive on all those things, regardless. They're real touchy about that stuff for sure. And
for sure, man.
And I remember playing a show in Berlin, and they were like, if people had like Burzum patches or something like that, they wouldn't let them into the show at Cassiopeia, that spot. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's interesting. It's like, that dude, Burzum, is who he is, right? He's clear about his beliefs, and they're fucked up. And like, but I also find it interesting that like we all come from a culture of punk where, Sid Vicious wore a swastika t-shirt, and Joy Division is named after a Nazi thing. And like, there's so much of that shit. And like, it's like I happened to look at I don't really know much about old Boston hardcore, but I was looking at like the Last Rites 7-inch, and like, there's that one song that Dinosaur Jr. covers that I really like, and then I don't care for the rest of their songs. But I happened to notice while looking at Discogs that like one version of one of the records had all this Hitler shit on it, and I think it was just like. Yeah, I think at that point it was just pushing buttons, but it's interesting, like there's so much of that history in punk that is used for shock value, but the ultimate politics are good, but it's interesting. And we're to live in a different time, it's like, it's just, so it's not acceptable now.
Yeah, that's the thing about just media in general, like art in general is even sitcoms. Like, for example, if you watch like an old sitcom from the 80s, like there's a lot of stuff that they say in there that would be like totally unacceptable these days. But
oh, for sure.
But you can't like, cancel David Schwimmer like in 20
right.
2021 for saying something like mildly sexist back in like whenever Friends was on. You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, there are things like for me personally, like bitch is a word that I don't say, or, like in the context of like a woman or anything like that. Like it's just, like it's just not something I say. And I've been watching this horrible, sometimes I watch like terrible sitcoms to like, calm my brain at night. And there's like one I've been watching that's recent, the last decade. And the guys on it, it's a show created by women and starring women, but the guys on it call each other bitches and call the women bitches. And it's very interesting to me. And every time I see it, it makes my skin crawl a little bit. And I know that wouldn't happen right now, but it's really interesting. These things change fast. I mean, tomorrow I'm renting some of the movie theaters here are doing like rentals. Like you can rent the whole theater for cheap.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And,
I heard of that.
I've done like a couple where they were just showing other movies, but the smaller theater here, I just found out you can bring your own movie.
Oh, wow.
So tomorrow I've rented the theater and I'm going to show Street Trash.
Nice.
Some friends. And I invited one friend who's kind of young. And I thought, shit, he and his girlfriend, like, there's probably some really fucked up stuff in street trash that like, they might just be mortified by. And I just, that's not, that to me is like, just doesn't register because that's like a classic movie, but you're like, well, obviously this is like, I mean, just starting, like it's horrible toward the homeless, but I'm like, I can't even imagine how much fucked up shit in there. There's like obviously tossing of severed penises and whatever else,
definitely.
but like,
Yeah.
there's all that stuff. And like, I think to a certain level, like certain types of art are fair game and but yeah, it's interesting, man. And there are fine lines. And I think it's up to us, like as artists and to people who care and are politicized to make those decisions, like who you're going to support and what works under the context of art and things like that.
Yeah, I have a slightly different opinion about a lot of that stuff because I mean, I think that once people start regulating like what's acceptable and what's not, you get into a different type of fascism. It's like, to me, it smells like book burning and stuff like that. When suddenly you can't have access to certain things because there's some standard being enforced. And back in the 80s or whatever, when I was a kid, like I grew up in the suburbs, man. I grew up in a very middle of the road, like upper middle class, middle class background. I wasn't exposed to anything. It was just regular shit in life.
Yeah.
And then, I started going into New York City, and it was like the extremities of life were presented to me. And also in reality, like the realism of going into a place like that, but then also like art-wise, like creatively with music and literature and having access to certain things that were forbidden and definitely not, accepted by society at that time, and that I think being able to look at the extremes gives you a full understanding, I think, of what's actually possible in the world, good or bad. And I think that having like a large bandwidth of experiences, some of it could be repugnant, but that's up to you to decide, really, and I think that, I mean, if you're going to, like we were talking earlier about the use of like fascist imagery in like early 80s hardcore, and yes, definitely that was, Nazi skins were a thing in the 80s, and if you have that proclivity, if you're a maniac in that way, you're gonna find that regardless if like the Last Rites record has some sort of symbolism, that is associated with fascism or racist ideologies. But so that you have that presentation of that imagery and that idea in kind of a neutral setting, I guess. And one guy can interpret that as, okay, I'm going to become like a white power skinhead. And the other guy can take that information and go in a different direction with it, and that's, but both of those people are going to find, they're going to seek that level regardless of I think of whether or not they bought that one particular record or went to that particular show or saw this like book or whatever, because I just think that all that stuff is out there anyway in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 points there. I think one is like intent. What is your intent? And I think that shocking, taboo, horrible imagery. I mean, obviously you and I, like that's one of the things we've bonded on over the years is like fucked up movies and stuff like that. And I have looked my whole life for the next fucked up movie, and they're mostly horrible things, but it's, what is the intent, right? Is the intent just to shock, or is it to express an idea? I mean, obviously like something very, obvious, like Sallow is like horrific and would be banned and was banned, but the point was anti-fascist. But like, somebody could see it and think like, wow, I love seeing this dominance of women, and I love seeing people eat shit. But like the intent is there. And then the other thing is like, as someone who does not believe in any way, shape, or form of like destiny or any like any, anything being set in stone. I think that stuff is important because just from experience, like I was saying, like I cannot even imagine what my perception of life and reality and art and politics and ethics would be without punk and hardcore. Like there's a very, very high chance I would be a Trump person because I grew up in a small town in Kentucky, and it was that stuff. And I saw the shock, and I saw all of it, but I also was exposed to the idea of, anti-misogyny and anti-racism and veganism and all these things that like have become like absolute tenets of my life. So, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I think you can shock without being racist, right? Like where I think you can create art that even, that is pushes the absolute boundaries of taste and hate and all those kind of things, and still have the intent be good. Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting, man. Like I don't necessarily think that like somebody who became a Nazi skinhead was going to do that regardless. And if they stumbled upon, I don't know what, it's like my perception of Manson. Like I know, you and we've watched Manson documentaries together, and
Sure.
And I know you've like covered his songs and things like that. And I find him very interesting as a pop culture character and as a what he represents in American culture and the 60s and all that kind of stuff. But, of course, as I have gone on, I'm like, oh, his ideas are repugnant, right? He is like,
Well, yeah, definitely.
he is the worst. And it comes to that point where I'm like, well, do I want to wear a Manson shirt? What does that mean? What does that represent? And would I want to buy a newly released single of his music? Like, I don't know, those kind of things are interesting. And I'm not saying I have the answer, but I think it's worth being cognizant of, like I saw you did an episode or discussed Gigi Allen.
Sure. Yes.
And like, think about him. Like I do love like that first LP. I mean, I think that fucking record is awesome, but I also know the dude has like racist songs, and like I've always found him interesting as like a cartoon character. Like literally in Reckless Records, there's like a Gigi Allen coloring book, and I'm like, wow, that's interesting. This dude like pushed the limits, but also was he actually a racist and misogynist? I mean, he has songs with like the hard N word in them.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, there's like there's brutality and depravity and all that stuff in there. And,
right.
But the thing is I think that one of the things you got to be aware of too is like, being extreme, like the way everyone wants to be extreme in some way. Now that, I feel like without a guy like Gigi Allen, there would be no like Marilyn Manson or something like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, all right, we're going to be extreme. We're going to be into like this outsider thing, but like be aware of what that really is, and I think that's my fascination with Gigi Allen is like, that guy really did have deep emotional problems, like horrible family life, abuse, sexual abuse. And that's what it means to be an outsider, is to have,
right.
That's what you're romanticizing by being into extremity or whatever. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You're romanticizing abuse and all these other things that are associated with that, and all of the resultant things that come from that. And I just think in general, in our modern culture, maybe since the 90s, it's been kind of like dismissed and, okay, well, we're extreme. We're into this far out stuff, we're into body modifications and all, mm-hmm. But you have to understand what that actually means. You know what I mean? What you're actually, what that is the earmark of is like, right. A lot of times it's abuse, and a lot of people I know that are into like all sorts of extremity, they got similar stories, and
yeah.
and like everyone's got a lip ring and, all these things these days, but it's like you have to be aware of where a lot of that comes from, in some ways.
Absolutely. I mean, I go in like, I've gone on a few like GG wormholes in my life where I like read all about him and he is certainly a person. I mean, his story is very similar to Manson's,
Exactly. Yeah. It's,
and he is a person who 100% could have been a serial killer, but instead he was a musician. He was an artist to his, in his way. And like, that is interesting. That's highly interesting, and the cult around him and what he could have become. He could have become a Manson, leader of people and whatever, or a total loner serial killer. And instead he became like a shit eating punk, or punk singer.
Or on the other end, he could have been a pop star too, man. It's like if you
Right.
listen to the Jabbers record, for example, that's like some Ramones, Stooges style, catchy like punk rock music.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like without a doubt, the guy's has an incredible work ethic too for a dude who probably lives on the streets, But like,
Yeah.
look at all the records he put out, And if that energy had gone into being, focusing on making music or, dealing with his issues or whatever, if he broke off a little piece of that energy into dealing with some of these issues, he might have, been like a successful, pop singer. Who knows?
Right. For sure. I mean, and I, of course, I'm not saying like, I think his music is whatever and it's there and I enjoy some of it. And, I've watched Hated numerous times in my life. And, I don't think anything should be wiped off. Well, I don't know. I can't say that, but I guess I don't know about censorship and like, as it relates to like, I don't know if like cancel culture is fascism because fascism is dictated by a small group of people in a government setting and, where an overall decision cancel culture at its worst is closer to like tarring and feathering, and
yeah, which is lethal, actually.
Right, which is terrible.
For somebody, yeah,
right.
It's a horrible thing to do.
Which is terrible, but I also think that there is a certain point where, like, I think there are elements of gray with all that kind of stuff. Like, I think, especially for like older white dudes to deride cancel culture. Like when I hear Nick Cave talking shit about it, I'm like, just shut the fuck up.
Well,
dude.
yeah,
like,
with I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I mean, the way it's being used with like the grand old party, they're using it as they're playing culture wars with that term.
Right.
It's not like they don't really mean any of that shit. Like they don't mean that you should go out and buy G.G. Allen records.
Right.
They mean that their guy who's like spewing the most reprehensible hate speech should have a right to say what he says.
Exactly.
Without being like called out. That's what they're saying.
Right.
They're not championing. They're not champions of like anti-scene or like the Mentors or something like that.
Right.
They just want their guy to be able to say what he's going to say.
Yeah.
And that's
exactly.
It's just culture wars. They did that during the Obama administration too. It was just, they're just playing the old games.
And those are people that are proponents of censorship and do want to silence art and ban art. Those are the people that would sue and ban Robert Mapplethorpe or whoever the fuck else. And so, they are not proponents of open media and open communication by any means. But, I don't know. Like a lot of things become like overarching terms. And I think for people to get called out on their shit when they're predators or they're, racists or whatever, like, I don't think that's like cancel culture. I think that's like, that's getting busted for being a fuck, for being a monster.
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
and like if some person made an old joke that was off color and somebody finds it and shits on them, like maybe that should create dialogue. That shouldn't create wiping of somebody off of the, that should create growth versus like someone who's a serial predator or serial racist or whatever. Like those people need to get shut down and their power needs to be taken away from them. I don't know, maybe, and I'm always curious, like a lot of the people that get wiped away, I just wonder how they live and what their life is like. I find that very interesting. And I understand that like news outlets don't want to give voice to, I don't know, like Louis C.K. might be a perfect example. Like, dude seems sketchy. I'm not like a huge fan of his in any way, but I'm curious. Like sometimes I'm like, how does that dude live? Like, what's his life? Like, do these people ever get jobs again? Like, do they, like if you fuck up, if we're wiping someone off the face of the earth entirely, it's no different than mass incarceration.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Louis C.K., it's because I've had endless discussions about this with a lot of people, and it's like, yeah, it's definitely a weird quirk that he has, like very very bizarre sexual proclivity in my opinion. Can't really relate to that. However, I don't think the guy should be like, I don't think his livelihood should be taken away from him. I think he should, discussion, like dialogue is like, that's the only thing I find that's not being extended to people. I mean, unless you're like a straight up guilty party, like Harvey Weinstein or something like that, where you're, this long rap sheet of rapes and victimizations, like you've stepped outside the letter of the law and you get put in jail. I think that's a clear cut example of, the consequence to his actions. But it's like, if you're into like some weird sexual stuff, it makes people uncomfortable. You say some off color things that you should have the opportunity to discuss what your intent was, or apologize, or maybe you did do something fucked up. It's like, I've wronged people in the past. I've done things that were not, I've hurt people and, but there are things I'm sorry for. Does that mean that I have to pay that price for the rest of my life? There should be a consequence, but there should also be forgiveness too,
I think that there are a couple things in that, like in a situation like that, in situations of racism or misogyny or sexual assault, these are people that don't have, in most cases, don't have the law on their side, and traditionally haven't had society on their side. Like, rapes aren't normally prosecuted, and sexual assault like that, like a guy, as I understand it, and once again, I don't want to get on a Louis C.K. thing because I don't really give a fuck about him personally, but like, yeah, as I understand it, he blocked the door for two young women comedians and forced them to watch him jerk off while they couldn't leave the room. That's fucked up. That's
that to me, that to me, that's an assault. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's an assault, and that's one of the main things that I first heard. And then other people like Sarah Silverman were like, yeah, we'd be on a cross-country trip and he'd just whip his dick out and jerk off. And I was like, gross, but I didn't stop him. Well, that's still assault. But like, so what do you do as a woman? Like you can't, there's a power struggle. There's a power, that's power. Like that shows me that dude, if he had even more power, would be doing more fucked up things. He'd be like the cops in Louisville who took these kids that were part of a community organization and like started turning these kids into like sex ring slaves in Louisville. And nothing ever happened from that. A couple guys went to jail, but like they were taking poor kids that were part of like a community outreach thing and basically pimping them out and sharing them amongst each other and fucking them. Oh, and man. That's what, like, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, these kids or these young comedians that are female, they don't have a recourse. They don't have a way. So that's why this is like, that's to me is like the very positive of whatever we're going to call cancel culture, because it's like, it's fucking street justice. And there's no other justice for it. Like, that's the thing. It's like, I'm not oppressed. Like, no one ever does that to me. If somebody tried to do that to me, I'd kick them in the fucking nuts, right? Like, I'd fight my way out that door. But like, I've never been in a situation where I was trapped physically by somebody, or I was exploited by someone who had more power than me. Like in a direct way. Obviously, we're all exploited by people that have more power than us on a daily basis. But so those are the kind of things where I think like there is no other recourse, so that person gets shut the fuck down, because you can't be doing that stuff, and it can't be prosecuted, So I don't know. I mean, and like I'm saying, I don't know all that much about him, but I am curious still as a human being, like, where do those people go in life, and like, how do we help rehabilitate? Like, I don't like the idea of smashing anyone that's not like a true absolute monster piece of shit off the face of the earth. I like the idea of them learning and maybe growing from it, take their power away, but like,
yeah, but that is what seems to be missing from this equation, though, is after you smash this person and destroy their life or whatever, you just walk away from, that's it. They don't get a chance to do any kind of penance for what they did, or regain any trust with people, And I'm not trying to defend Louis C.K. I'm just saying that in general, like that is something that I perceive that. And I think even if you go out and you rob a liquor store or something like that, they eventually let you out of jail. You know what I mean? And you can't get a job. You can't get a regular job, unfortunately, and you probably go back to a life of crime, which is another fucked up aspect of our society. But you serve out a sentence, and then you're allowed to regain, or try to regain your status somewhat in society, or join society again. But in the Wild West that we live in right now, with all this stuff going on, it's not clear like what actually, what the next steps are for some of these people,
Right. And I think that there is, there's a massive culture shift going on. And I think that some of this is the growing pains of that. Like, there are things like, obviously sometimes I think of these in things that are like more high profile that really have no effect on my life. But like, I think about like that guy, James Gunn, who's the director who did like Trauma movies and stuff. And then did the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. Like, some old jokes from his Trauma era came out, and he got fired from the Guardians of the Galaxy movie. Well, after some time passed, that calmed down. He got hired back. Like, so I think those shades of gray are come in, and maybe things can happen where people do get prosecuted or shut the fuck down, or people feel able to come forward and speak. I mean, it's like you're mentioning like Gigi Allen, like being a direct line to Marilyn Manson. Well, Marilyn Manson was all fun and games, and he was just like some fucking dipshit poser who made, music, like, and then it comes out that he's a repeat abuser of women and his crew and everybody else. And it's like, well, what's like, I don't know, I don't know. Like, I don't listen to his music, so I don't appreciate that. I don't listen to like, I don't know. Maybe I don't listen to a lot of stuff that is about like being monstrous in an abstract artistic way, and then being shocked when that person is a monster.
Well, I guess that's exactly the point I was trying to make earlier, though, was that Marilyn Manson is like a commercial commodity, basically,
Right.
And, you go to Ozfest or whatever, and there's like all these people, yay,
Right.
But what's being actually displayed there is some pretty outside. I mean, I don't think Marilyn Manson, particularly his music, is very challenging to me, but there's the where that precedent was set to do things like that goes all the way back to like being an extreme person. So if you're an extreme person, you're an outsider. Like, there's a reason why you're an outsider,
Right.
and the embracing of that. Though if you truly feel that way, maybe it's a way to safely exercise some of the things that you're feeling. Great, but there also comes responsibility with that. If you're gonna like, cut yourself on stage or whatever, like, you got to understand that is a side effect of something else going on internally.
Yeah.
And it's not just like, oh, look how crazy that is, and I think that's, we played like festivals, we played with festival with Marilyn Manson, and like, the embracing of everyone, the people that in the crowd and everything, who are like, now they're part of me is like, you guys are kind of missing the point really of what's being displayed. And I think that's kind of the point I was making about drawing a line between Gigi Allen and someone like Marilyn Manson. It's and even the mainstreaming of punk rock music in general. Like, go to Hot Topic, it's like everyone's into punk music, but they don't have the ideologies. They don't have any of the things that are behind it. And the same thing with like extremity, or extreme culture or whatever you want to call it. No one really understands why it's extreme. They just see this like imagery, and it's like this hollow representation of something that they might be feeling.
For sure. And that's a watering down of anything. I mean, I think that's true with like horror films or like quote unquote cult films, movies that are manufactured to be cult films right now. It's like, where's the pathos behind this, right? Like,
yeah.
It becomes just genre exercises and imagery, and like, what's the true like tortured psyche behind it. And it's hard, man. It's like while you're talking, people come into my mind of like Throbbing Gristle or The Fall, or like people that are really push the boundaries, but like most of them are assholes, like most of them, if you read biographies, like they're not cool people and they've done fucked up shit to people, and maybe they grew or whatever. But like, yeah, I mean, a show is only like an hour or two a night, and your songs are written at one point and then they're done, and you have to live the rest of your fucking life, and it is true. Like, we want the insanity in the art, but then we want the people to just shut down and be normal otherwise. And it's hard to do that. Not everybody can do that. I mean, so I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that there's a decision to be made with that. Or
No,
anything. It's
definitely not.
yeah.
But all I can say is that the inner dialogue that I've had with myself over 40 something years of being involved in this type of thing, or music and culture and all that sort of stuff, I feel like has like that potential, that opportunity for reflection, I think is really important, and I think that being exposed to stuff like that at, a relatively young age, and it is what sparked that within me. It wasn't like going to school every day, even though I did do all those things and I got, excellent grades and all that sort of stuff. That really wasn't what made me a good person, I think. And well, I mean, it's debatable, I guess, whether I'm a good person, but well, those aren't the things that contributed to being me, who I am today. It's
Right.
the other outside stuff that I was safely able to experience. And I guess that's what some of these people like Gigi, and like even though say you went to the show, right? You're definitely putting yourself at risk, but you're also still at a safe distance from the realities of what his life is on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a year later, you think back on that and you have some kind of understanding of a world that you really aren't part of. And maybe that enriches your life in a different way. It's not just like, crossing the T's and dotting the I's and showing up for work every day that turn you into like, I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I'm just saying in general, like, you kind of have to have like a really broad swath of experience in life to really have a full emotional development, I think, in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I, and kind of looping back to some of the stuff we were saying in the beginning, like about the pandemic and the perception of things, is like, I do think having that like that look into the light and the dark and all the different sides, it gives you empathy and perspective, and I think it gives you the opportunity to have a huge viewpoint and like a very grand acceptance of the world and things like that, and it can go either way, I mean, I think overall it goes well. It's like overall the people that have partaken in depraved art, whether it's novels or films or music or paintings, have been good. It's like, look at the torture in Francis Bacon's work. Every person that has enjoyed that has not become a depraved lunatic. They've become enriched by it. So I don't know, but it's weird, man. I mean, I don't think that shit's going away, but I still think we have the choice to say fuck you, and I still think there are the abilities. It's like, like I like Slayer, and I think it sucks that Tom Araya is like a right-wing Christian.
Dude,
I'm like,
I know, man.
Like, fuck you. But on the other hand, like, I don't want him eating flesh either, So it's one of those things, like, we want them to be what they are, but we also don't want them to be, whatever. Like, so that's interesting, man. It's hard. It's like, I think there is the ability to be, and like, good is a relative term, but like, to not be full of hate for humanity, in terms of like maybe you or I hate humanity, but we don't hate people or races, or whatever.
No, definitely not. I mean, yeah.
I think the ability to do good in that way is there, and still be depraved, and still have dark leanings and dark concepts and things like that. It's interesting, man. It's an interesting time, and I think it's, like I'm saying, I think there's a big push, and sometimes you just have to like put a fucking barrier up to smash the shit in order to like clean it all up. Like I'm saying before, like I think we need to like destroy conservative realities in order to like get to progress.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's funny, I bring this up a lot too, is remember back in 2012 with the big Mayan calendar, everyone was waiting for, planet Nibiru to, come into our solar system and all that. But I actually think that we did go through some kind of paradigm shift that's been really in progress for the last like 10 years. I mean, I think that even the stuff we're talking about right now is a huge paradigm shift. Like
Absolutely.
From what 10, 15 years ago, was.
Yeah.
That these types of things are going on, I think, is a positive thing in our culture. I mean, I don't want anyone to like call me out for being like whatever, a toxic male or something like that, even though I probably do a lot of things that people would consider toxically male. But I also think that it's good that these conversations are happening, as long as I have an opportunity to answer for myself. You know what I mean? But
yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think that paradigm shift is coming. For me, I would chalk it up to like a new generation, and it gives me hope that like, while there are growing pains, and while there are certainly things that people that are 20 years or more younger than me do that sometimes I'm like, I roll my eyes at, I'm also like, I did dumbass shit when I was a kid too. And like, I mean, from the way I dressed to the certain things I was into, and you go there so that you can grow and become what you grow into. And like, I think that, like you're saying, that paradigm shift is good. And like, the system has to be shocked sometimes to make those changes, and And it's funny, man. I was thinking today, like, I went to the gym before I got on the phone with you, and like, that's something that I wouldn't say struggle with, but like try to think about a lot is like masculinity, because like I'm like a masculine person. I'm like just inherently, because of my size
Right.
and who I am, all that, like I'm very male, very masculine, but like I don't identify with it, I don't identify with the trappings of it, but it's like, I think like, how do you lift weights and not be like a toxic bro? How do you, play guitar riffs and not be a fucking meathead? All those kind of things. I find all that stuff interesting, and I think about it a lot, like how to do those things, but not fall into the trappings of being toxic, because I don't know every in and out of your life, but like you're a male, you're a masculine dude, but like I've never seen you as being toxic in that way. And I know you were joking, but like, I think that's interesting. And I think that's something that like is worth exploring as men and as society, is like, how do we be who we are, and not just like biologically, but like in general, like I'm born this way, and this is how I feel comfortable in my body in that regard. And that's fine. And how do I live as a man and be masculine because I am, and like not turn it into like this fucking bro dude, like the worst elements of it.
I mean, I think I got a pretty good handle on not being a toxic male, but I think that I'm oftentimes misunderstood, and because I have to step out of my own microcosm a lot of times. And like a couple of years ago, I used to work at this witchcraft shop in New York City, and the whole staff was like women and gay men, and everyone I work with that's known me for many years. So I was friends with her, the owner. I've known her for like 10 years, but the patrons a lot of times, would see a guy with tattoos and like, whatever, like the way I look, and automatically would judge me as being somebody that was completely different than who I actually am.
Right.
And that's like, it was like this very, it was a good experience for me. That just my appearance was like enough to like make people really uncomfortable there.
Yeah.
And that's all I really meant by that. But it's like,
yeah, I mean,
but and then of course, some of the stuff with martial arts and fighting and things like that I engage in too, also paints even more of a picture of like me being like a knucklehead or something,
Well, of course, I mean, and then like that's, and I think you live your life not as a knucklehead, so
Absolutely
you avoid that trapping, and I think that the idea that like anybody doesn't make some snap judgment against, or not even against, but just about someone else when they see them, it's just how it is, and it's like how you act on that, like is what matters, right? And like,
Sure.
But yeah, I feel the exact same way. It's like, I don't know what I am in my like brain, but like who I am on an outward level is not, it is who I am. It absolutely is who I am. And at the same time, it's not what someone else might think of me. Right. And I've dealt with that a lot. Like for some reason, after I lost a lot of weight, I don't get this as much, but like, when I was bigger, I had a lot of people always like saying like, "Oh, you kicked that person's ass," or "You tell them what's up." It was weird, like this kind of like I'd walk in. I remember walking into like a restaurant and like waiting on like we were waiting for a table, and like some other dude waiting for a table was like, "You could just throw somebody out of here," or something. It was something weird like that, and I would get shit like that a lot, where I was just like, I didn't even say a fucking word in here. I didn't make any gestures. Like, there's nothing about me that is violent in any fucking way, shape, or form, or intentionally intimidating, but that was something I would get all the time, and I have to be aware of it, and I will say that I'm like self-conscious, especially now, of like, being like a big guy in black with combat boots on and a shaved head. I'm like, God, I don't want someone to think I'm a fucking skinhead. I mean, luckily, like, that's not like your average person doesn't even fucking know what that is, but like,
Yeah.
you know, but that stuff is interesting, man. And I find that interesting. Like, one of the reasons we talked about this before, but one of the reasons, like, with my like exercise life, that I never got into like any martial arts, is I was just like very adamant for myself about like not, I mean, partially because I don't want to get hit, but like, I didn't want to like strike anybody or have that be like any kind of like physical contact be part of it. And because I know people on both ways. I know people like you and a guy that I trained with in terms of just like circuit training, who does a lot of jujitsu and boxing, and is absolutely an artistic, sweet person and not like violent. So I understand it, but I also see the other side of like, I've had people tell me like, oh, it's nice to walk down the street and know you could take somebody down, and I'm just like, that's the problem. I feel like everybody's walking around thinking like, who can I take down with my gun or my knife or my arms? And like, I feel like we need to get away from that. Like, we need to get everybody to a point where everybody feels safe around each other, and we aren't looking for exits and looking for, techniques of how to subdue somebody.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a melting pot of people that train like martial arts and stuff. I mean, there's like, I mean, I've been doing it for a really long time, and like, different, dating all the way back to being a kid, and like, yeah, there's definitely a bandwidth of people that are involved in that, and some people are that kind of bro mentality, but I would say that they're kind of more in the minority, really, and a lot of times they get weeded out because of the ego aspects of things. It's like I imagine people like outside on the street, what they talk, the ones who have like the most talk about that are the ones inside on the mats who probably are getting owned every day by people and end up, their ego can't take that, and they just end up not showing up after a while.
Right.
There's a way of getting weeded out, not like physically weeded out, but you destroy your ego and you reassemble it in a certain way so that you can allow yourself to be defeated and stuff and grow that way. And then people who can't make that jump usually don't stick around very long.
Right.
And that's an important aspect of being humble, is just knowing that my idea of who I am is totally different than the reality of who I am. You know what I mean? And
Right.
it's like I think it's a really good thing to go through. And ever since I was like a young kid wrestling and doing, like Taekwondo and all this stuff, I like learned that. And I think that's probably why I'm not like a bully or an asshole or, one of those people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think getting to that point where you don't have anything to prove. I mean, I think that's something that like I hear from folks in that world, and it's something that like I have to work with myself to remember. Like, I mean, shit, with music and art, like I do this for myself. Like, and the times that I fucking hate music and art is when I'm looking for the reaction. When and sometimes you just have to do it as a musician, where you're like, okay, cool, I'm putting this song out into the world, and then I'm like, oh, it didn't get the reaction I hoped, and then I'm like, wait, who the fuck did I do this for? Nobody,
Yeah,
just
no,
me.
totally, man. Yeah.
And that's how I feel about like exercising, and that's like, what I love about like, I do a lot of like solitary things, like riding my bike and things like that are just like, like I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to do a team sport. Like, I mean, I love the camaraderie of touring and things like that, but like, I'm like, this isn't about proving anything to anybody. Like, if there's a small goal, it's for me. And that goal is generally like about growth. Like, it's not about like, like me looking for like a Spotify number is as pointless to me as me looking for like a number of a weight I'm trying to pick up, because those things for me, just like, I don't I try not to like quantify my life. It'd be like looking for the amount of money I'm trying to reach in the bank, you know, and that would just be like, I'd just be bummed out all the time if those were the things I was looking for. It's like, I'm looking for them in terms of like, how does it make me feel, and how does it settle my brain, and where's my like consciousness at, and how does it make me happy, you know, like those kind of things. And that's kind of like the struggle.
Well, speaking of which, we should talk about the record now too, because that's like I definitely like wanted to. Definitely, what I was really interested in too is the new Fotocrime record. Man, I see you guys. You know, since we don't see each other in person right now, I've been following all their stuff on on Instagram and recording and all that sort of stuff. So what's the details, man?
Well, yeah, I mean, everything that I've been posting about is all like old shit, right? So, I mean, I don't know if we talked after South of Heaven came out, the last Fotocrime full length. Okay. So yeah, so that came out in March of 2020, and like, yeah, basically like I did a tour of Mexico, which was fucking amazing, and then played one show in the States, and everything was canceled, and that was the day the record came out, and it just kind of, I'm feeling more at peace now. Like at the time, or for most of last year, I just felt like, oh, this was a lost record because I didn't get to tour it, and you don't get that like direct interaction, to like know how people are just I don't know. There's just something about a show where you just feel like you're connecting with the music with people, and people buy the record and at the show and stuff like that. But I expressed that publicly a couple times and had people reach out and just be like, I fucking dug this record. Music connects with people, and to whether it's hundreds or millions, like it's meaningful. And so yeah, man, it was interesting because that record was like recorded in the new single I released last month is outtakes from that session. And it was like I was kind of in all these different scenarios where, like, at the end of a huge European tour, actually exactly right 2 years ago now, I was in London for a couple weeks hanging out after a tour, staying there, and I had that like post-tour whiplash where I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, I need to be doing music. Like, I can't, I can't just be going to museums and movies. Like, I need to be, it was weird. It's like that weird thing where you're like, suddenly you're not going 110 miles an hour. So I contacted a friend and got in touch with a studio in London, like a really DIY place. It was super cool. This guy named Simon Small, and went and recorded the 2 new songs I've been playing on tour with him. And that was really fun. And then like a month later, got invited to play like the first secret Jawbox reunion show because I'm really close with Jay Robbins, and I usually record with him. And so I was like, oh, cool, can I do a couple days in the studio with you before that? So we did a couple days then I played that show and then flew home. And then I had this grand idea to record with Steve Albini, and had this like, idea that like he just had so much history of doing electronic punk music, or semi electronic punk music with Big Black so long ago. I was like, it'd be really cool to do drum machine stuff with Steve. And I'd met him a little bit. Like, my brother and I did a shellac show a long time ago in Louisville, and he and I have lots of mutual friends, and so I got in touch, and he was really receptive and cool with it. But then as I thought about it, I was like, you don't go to Electrical Audio and not use the drum room.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to
like that's just fucking stupid. So I got my friend Hayden that plays drums for the band Mets in Toronto, and he's just like one of those guys. It's like just a great basher. You know what I mean? Like that kind of guy that like every hit has just got power behind it. And he's really, I really like just like, I don't want to say meat and potatoes because that's like undercutting who he is, because he's a really talented and inventive drummer, but like, I like just power behind the drums.
Sure.
And so, yeah, so I got him, and I got Nick Thieneman from Young Widows, Nick, and he's been in Fotocrime. And then this guy, Eric, who was in Kerosene 454, who'd played guitar for Fotocrime in Europe, all of us converged in Chicago and learned these songs I'd written. It was really stressful because it was like we were practicing in Russian Circle's practice space with my PA kind of blasting like the click and the electronic elements and trying to get exactly synced up with that. And like I feel like the slower a tempo goes, the harder it is to sync up with it. Like there's that kind of like mid ground or that kind of pushing, but then sometimes when things start to get like a little slower, you know, like the natural tendency is not there. So like one of the songs was a bit slower, and that was a huge challenge. I was like kind of freaking out, like what the fuck did I do kind of thing, you know, and electrical audio is expensive with Albini. So we just had one day. So we were doing 4 songs, but it all turned out really great, man.
But
It
that
awesome.
was one day tracking and mixing all in one day?
No, just one day of tracking.
Okay.
One day
All
just
right.
tracking the basic instrumentals of one song. And it was super cool because we stayed 2 nights at Electrical. So we got in the night before and just had the whole place to ourselves, and we got to pull out all their drum kits and try them out and decide what we wanted to use. And just, it was really fun, man. It was like because it's such a cool space, just to kind of have it to yourself was really fun. And then in the morning we just woke up and we were there and setting up, and Steve rolls in and kind of, you know, he's who he is, you know, he's kind of intentionally quirky, you know, and
Well, I don't really know how Steve is because I never met the man. So
Yeah, I mean,
I know that he's a bit of an icon, you know. So
Right, like-
what is he like actually, you know?
you know, he's, in my experience, because he's not my friend, he's just a guy I met a couple times. He's very no nonsense. Like in email, he's always straightforward and helpful. And I've emailed with him a couple times since then. But he doesn't, you know, he's not like your buddy. You know, he's not like, and you can tell that he's not invested in knowing your songs or knowing much about you, and he doesn't give a shit like what instrumentation he doesn't care about like your amp or whatever. He's there, like he says, to document the shit, and it's not in a cold way, but it's like his job is to do great mic placement and great recording to tape. And his intention, as he says, and as I've read from him, is that he wants it to go to tape to the point where when you mix it, it's essentially done. You know, like your tones are there. And so it's cool, man. He was nice, and, you know, he would be like, oh, this sounds great. But he's not, you know, he's not bubbly. He's very straightforward and very mellow. And like my brother happened to come into town because like he was starting a tour that day, and he dropped by and he said something like, hey, I said, hey, Steve, this is my brother, Evan. He goes, hey, we've met before. And Steve said something, you know, like, I was informed of that, or just something very funny like that. Like, it wasn't like, I remember that show, thanks, or anything. It was like, I was informed that we met before, you know? And so he's like that. And then at the end of the night, I asked him if he had the big black drum machines anymore, because, you know, it was famously called Roland.
Right.
And I said, do you still have that? And he goes, I think I do. And he opened up the room that's kind of like their storage room and like their like workbenches for soldering things and stuff. And he found the drum machine, pulled it out of a box, told me all about it, let me take a photo of him with it, and, you know, and him and me. And it was really nice, man. He wasn't excitable, but he told me every bit of information and wasn't, you know, didn't roll his eyes or anything. So it was cool. I mean, that was like a little bit of like personality and like real history. And we talked about it. And since then I found a drum machine that I thought, because it's an Emu drumulator that they use at the end. And I found one that had very similar modifications, and I bought it and was like, hey, you told me there were two big black drum machines and you only have one of them. Is this the other one? And he kind of like told me all this stuff, but didn't say whether it was or wasn't. And I wrote email again. I go, oh yeah, cool. But like, is this it? He's like, oh no. But he wrote me right back, and he's super cool. So it was great, man. You know, and like, I mean, I'm not going to say there's nobody better than him at recording drums, but like, there's nobody like him.
Yeah.
You know, it's like he does that thing, and it was very hard for me because like we were in a big rush, and I was stressed, but it was very hard for me to get a concept of the performance while we were tracking, because something about the way he brought up the playback was very like harsh sounding, which is how his music is. And like, his music is, I really love, but it's hard for me to listen to. Like sometimes it's hard for me to listen to Big Black because the sounds are so abrasive. It's
very in your face. And
like the guitar is all, and that's the intention, but that's like not what I like to hear and not what feels good to my ears. So I don't listen to that stuff a lot, but there was a little bit of that with the playback of like, it was a little bit harsh in our tracks. And I was kind of like looking to the guys to be like, okay, what do you think? You know, is this working? And which is a weird position to be in, because I'm like the guy it's my band, it's my songs. And once again, these are all my friends, but they're all just showing up for a couple of days to track this shit. Like they don't have skin in the game. Like, like they don't like have emotional connection to this music like I do. So it was pretty stressful, man, but it worked out really well. And I think I got the best of both worlds, because from there I actually took the tapes, because I thought they would bounce the tapes down the 2-inch there. But what they do is kind of like, they charge you for that, like studio time, and Steve doesn't do it. So they'll wait till they have like a day's worth of tapes to bounce to digital, right?
Wow.
So the studio assistant was like, yeah, I might not do that for 2 weeks. And I was like, oh, well, fuck, I'm flying to Jay Robbins' studio the next day. So I flew with the reels, which was like felt very like classic rock and roll story, you know, like,
Yeah, it's like some like Led Zeppelin, you know.
Totally, man, you know. And I'm asking Steve, I'm like, like, is it okay if this runs through the fucking X-ray? He's like, yeah, that's fine, but like, show them what it is and don't let them pull it out, because like, what if they pull it out and it like unspools? And I was like, oh, good point. So he's like, carry it on, so it's on you. And I was like, okay. And that was really nerve-wracking, because unlike digital, which we've all been doing for so long, there was no fucking backup.
No, man, that's what I was thinking too, that you got all the goods right there. Man.
Right.
Yeah.
Like there was no backup whatsoever. Like I've got that reel, like everybody's gone home. You know, I spent thousands of dollars with people flying there and all that kind of shit. Like, and I've got this only thing. So that was really exciting. Then I get to Jay's, and we're going to do, I don't remember how many more songs we did, maybe like 4 or 5 more songs. And we did like the mixing for the whole album, and I did the vocal overdubs and the Albini shit. And with the Albini stuff, I recorded all the electronic elements simultaneously with the live music. So we recorded, but I only had 4 outs from my computer and my interface. So basically we had like 4 tracks of electronic elements. Mm-hmm. And so that would be like the click, like maybe stereo synths, and one other thing. And when you do electronic music, you just start getting like so many tracks, right? Because it doesn't matter. So that was really nerve-wracking. I'm like, okay, I basically have to sum these down. I have this many options. Like, and I had to keep in mind that like if there's wow and flutter, and if we lose the exact BPM while bouncing down to waves, I can't just dump in the electronic tracks from my recording software. So that was super nerve-wracking. And so when I got to Jay's, there was like, we couldn't get it exactly on, because there's, there's like more
latency and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
There's more pull, like the tape pulls a little bit, faster in the beginning and shit like that. So we were going song by song for these 4 tracks and adjusting it by like percentage points on Jay's tape machine to get it. And we did get it, but it was fucking nerve wracking. Like basically spent like a whole day doing that. And it was insane, man. And then we did some other stuff with Jay's sessions where I assembled a band of me, Jay, Darren Zintek, who drummed for Kerosene 454 and a bunch of other bands, and this dude Chris, who plays keys with Clutch a lot. And we kind of jammed and made up these songs around synth sequences that I'd done that were kind of like Public Image Limited album era vibe.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
And so we did that, and that was really wild too. So we just kind of jammed for a day with these guys, and then I took all the recordings and edited them together. And that was another thing where I was like, what the fuck am I doing? I'm just like jamming in the studio. I'm going to run out of time and money and like, and I still haven't done anything with those songs because they're super cool, but they're really hard for me to get my head around vocally because they're so different than anything else I've done. So it was wild, man. So the whole fucking process of recording this record was like, London, 2 sessions in Baltimore, Chicago, all these different people. And it was really fun. And in the end, long story short, is that like, I'm so fucking stoked I did all that shit because the record didn't get toured. Like I played 6 or 7 shows of those songs. And then that was it. So that record didn't get a life of touring. Like normally the records come to life and you associate all that time with the touring and those songs with that. And instead it became this existence of making the record, which I've never really had before, that for me, the experience of the record is absolutely the making of it and all the little adventures, not the traveling on it and the other side of it. So I'm really glad I did that in hindsight, actually.
Yeah, that's the thing, man. It's like we hadn't really spoken about it, and I knew that there was like a really cool story behind it, just observing all the stuff that was going on,
Yeah, I mean, it was fucking cool, man. It was a great experience, and like all these cool people involved, and there are other things like sending tracks to friends, like my friend Ellie. She performs as core Cass, and she plays harp, and so she played harp on a song, and like it was a pretty wild thing, and it's kind of actually advantageous in some ways that I didn't tour on it because I did have a little bit of a feeling when it was all said and done of like Fotocrime is a 50% electronic band, and here I've gone and had these like big, huge live Albini drums. How do I recreate that live? Like if I'm doing that with no drummer, like I've always done, that's going to be an odd sound coming out of the PA because it's not electronic drum machine. So it kind of worked out well that it is what it is. And, the record became like more rock than I think I have in mind for Fotocrime conceptually, but it once again, it all just became this piece, and like I can look at some positivity, like I'm not glad that tours got canceled or anything, but I'm glad that the record was this unique thing that had live elements that I probably won't do again because it's conceptually not exactly what I see Fotocrime being,
Yeah, it's weird, man, because it just becomes like this weird abstraction.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like it exists, and I mean, kind of a similar thing happened to us too. Like we put out an EP and a full length last year, and have yet to play any of those shows in front of a live audience. I mean, any of those songs in front of a live audience.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I mean, we did some of these. We did 2 of these, recorded video live. Pieces where it's like a live performance, like, they're real performances and they're filmed and recorded and everything, but there's no one there. It's just like the crew recording us. And,
right.
And even that is like weird because I'm like, wow, it's like a dress rehearsal. It's like an extended sound check or something like that, and it's it's like these songs still don't really exist to me because we haven't actually been out in front of people playing them, you know?
Right. I mean, that's super weird. I mean,
I don't like it, man. I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like it at all, to be honest.
Well, you know, and I will say that like I had to like in the last year, I've been recording more music and getting way more into recording at home and learning about it and basically have a new record finished that I did all myself at home, and was very thankful that I was like a one-man band, you know, that I didn't need anybody else and that I could do all this myself. And also had to like totally rearrange my brain and not think like, how will this be executed live, or will this sound cool live, or what will people think? Not that I like worry about what they think, but there's just that kind of thing because you're so used to playing music for people that sometimes even when you're making a part, you imagine an audience.
Oh yeah,
you know?
absolutely, for sure. Yeah,
You know,
that's
it's like I'm not like,
yeah.
right. I'm not like, will they love it? Will they like me? But I'm like, oh, you know, you just kind of intrinsically imagine an audience bobbing their head or whatever the fuck else. And I just kind of had to think like, I don't know when that will come back, man. I just got to erase that from existence. And this is purely for me, which has always been the goal for Fotocrime, but like really, really get there and be like, I don't fucking like, I can't have any concept that anyone will ever hear this. And it's been interesting. And since then, since I finished it, I've been also trying to like get into this mindset, which I'm kind of going back and forth with, above like just making some sound for myself and not thinking like, is this going to be a song? Is this going to be an album? Because I also realized like realistically, I can't release an album a year. I'd love to, but I can't. And I need to just like, I still want to make sound all the time. And I just need to just make sound for myself and enjoy it and maybe record it and listen to it on my own, but not worry about it being released or like where it'll go or even like if I'll finish it, you know?
Yeah, it's funny. I kind of been doing the same thing, man. It's like I've been working on this other project for over a year, and it's basically I've done 22 demos right now, and
Wow.
I haven't. And there's only like three things that I think like at the 19th demo, I'm like, oh, this is what the band sounds like. You know, it's like
Right.
It's like the first like 10 are just could be tuned songs, and then like the next like 6 like were terrible, and then like in the around 18 or 19, I'm like, oh, this is like what it's actually going to be, you know?
Right.
And then
Totally.
now it's like, oh, okay, well, this is like the sort of boundaries or lack of boundaries, or this is the environment that I'm going to be working in with this thing. And yeah, I mean, so like there's like 22 pieces of sound or music, whatever you want to call it, that only a very small percentage of that stuff might actually be completed in some way, you know? And it's good. It's good to do that. I mean, it's just, you know, like the last years, everyone got, their worlds got really small. So it's good to experiment with these kind of with no pressure on you, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think you know, it's interesting in like the musical medium, like obviously we like might play guitar or whatever. And, you know, it's just for ourselves, but you know, I gotta think that like, well, we know that like painters probably paint tons of shit that no one's ever sees. Right. Or they paint for a day and then they throw it away, or they paint over it. And I think with us, like it becomes so like goal oriented. And I've always been so fucking goal oriented that, yeah, I'm like, you know, and I hate the part of selling music and trying to get people into it. And I hate the social media part of it and stuff. It's like, I'm just trying to like, yeah, just make it like you're saying. It's like, just fucking paint the painting. Like, you know, and like the other parts, the act of it is as important as anything else. And I think that's like hard to get to sometimes when you're like a, you know, quote unquote career musician.
I love all that though. The I've always really been into process, like the process of stuff, you know, like that's why I like watching all of the extras on DVDs and everything. And they whip out the storyboards for, for the different scenes and all that. And, they talk about, all the different minutia that goes into making a film project. And I think, and, a lot of people I know of, we've gone to art school and have a practical thing going on with their art. And I see all the sketches they make and all these different things that never get finished. And I always try to incorporate that, man. I always think about writing songs the same way. It's cool, just things that never get used, or like you write something and then it doesn't go anywhere, but then like a year later, you're like, oh, I need a bridge, and you just pull that thing in and it works. It's
right.
It's like I think I like that more than actually like finishing songs in some ways, just throwing ideas against the wall. It's like such a cool, like freeing sort of experience.
Absolutely. I love like, and actually the record I just finished is like similar, where like there's things that, a couple of songs that were like from maybe 2015, 2016, when I was just starting Fotocrime, and they didn't work, or I couldn't conceive of how to get them to click, and then they do. And I kind of love that too. Like you're saying, it's like you come back to something and that was cool or wasn't right or didn't work or you couldn't finish or just was what it was, and you can perceive it in a different way. I really love that, because once music is released that I've made, I always fucking hate it. I don't hate it.
I can't just listen to it, like, man,
yeah,
for sure.
I'm just like, ugh. But like, if it hasn't been released, I can come back to it and have a really like clear perspective on it. Like, oh, this is good or it sucks, because there's no like, it doesn't matter either way. So I can come back and if it's good, I can make it, I can use it or whatever. And I like that. Like, it's something I've been toying with a lot lately, is just like, sometimes I just feel like, do I need to release music? Like, it's just what makes me the happiest. Like, I love putting out records, and I love the whole procedure, and I love touring, and I love listening to people's records, and I know that people appreciate it, but I still like, when the record is done and it's just for me, that's always my favorite time. And I don't know, I just really love that so much that like it gets harder and harder to give that up. To make it not only mine.
No, I hear you, man. It's like, that's like the greatest feeling. Like for me, it gets even more specific with like, because we go to Alan Duchess like every year, or not every year, whenever we make a record. So for me, there's this whole thing around finishing the record where it's like, okay, Alan, I'm coming, I'll be there at noon. Make sure you got the coffee on, you need anything on the way over. And like, we sit down, we bullshit for like an hour. And then like at the end of the day, I have this thing and I listen to it and I'm like, man, it's finally done. It's finally over with, this whole thing is done. And, my parents don't live too far from where his like studio is. So I always drop in on them and have dinner, and it's like this whole thing, and it's so awesome. And that's when I'm like, then I can't listen to it anymore after that.
Right.
And it's like, I've heard this enough times in my lifetime, and now it's time to actually perform this thing in front of people,
Absolutely, man. I mean, yeah, I have like I always feel like music for me, like the music I make is the music I want to hear most. Like, that's my goal, is I want to make something that I personally want to hear, that's somehow different than everything else. Like, the record I make, I can't find that exact record anywhere else, and I want to hear it, and it's what I want to make. And of course I love making the sounds and stuff, but so I listen to it a fucking ton, and then there'll always be that point where I'm like, oh, okay, it turns for me, and sometimes it's before it's released even, where I'm like, okay, I'm done with this. Like, I've exhausted it, and okay, now it's on to something else. But it's interesting, man. And I don't, maybe there's some ego in it, but maybe it's just like satisfaction and feeling good about something you did. I mean, I don't know, but it's, that process of it is really magical, and it's kind of like so separate from the like mechanics of like promoting a record and selling it and streaming it and all that stuff. That stuff just isn't. isn't cool.
I got like one really burning question that I've had for years
Okay.
actually, and it's like all through all the other bands that I've known you to play in, your Coliseum, National Acrobat, Black Cross, you've always had this pile of amps on stage. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whenever I saw you perform, there's always like this two full stacks at the minimum. How has that transition been for doing what you do in Fotocrime?
Well, I think I was on that path anyway, because like by the end of Coliseum for the last couple of years, I was using essentially like 3 amps on my side. I was using like a JCM 800 and then a twin. And then on like Kahan's side, on the bass side, I was using like another combo, or sometimes like a head. Like for a while, I was using a Verellen head and cabinet, but usually like some other amp over there. And I was doing stereo switching, and I even had a point where I was like could switch each amp on and off. So I had kind of like 3 amps and all that stuff was really fun. But it also like it gets really tiring. And there's a point when I'm like running cables and plugging in heads, and I'm like, I'm not tired of loading the gear. I'm just tired of all this bullshit I got to do to set up and break down and stuff. And so on one hand, I kind of made it even worse with Fotocrime, because when I tour with other people, I have my own PA. So we have these 2 huge 215 with horn Yamaha speakers. So those are essentially like the full stack, and that's the drum machine and all that shit. And then there's the combo. And then I also have a keyboard, and I have lights that I control with my feet. So it's like, I'm actually more tied up in cables than before. So, the sonics of it are not like that different. There have been tours where I played alone, and I did do like that show you saw me, that festival in Denver.
Yeah, the one in Denver, yeah.
That fly-in, like I was playing all direct. Like my guitars are direct, everything.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge. I think that's one of those things you start to learn in Europe. Like, when you first go to Europe and you're like, we got to turn down the amps, and like after like a year of battling with sound people in Europe, you're like, just learn to play at a volume where the PA does the work, and that's a talent too. I think that's a talent you got to learn to like do a fly in and jump up on a back line and like make that amp your own. And that's something I had to learn how to do, is like, just like we all do, is like, how do I make this guitar sound like me, no matter what amp it is? And I think I got pretty good at that. And that's kind of an extension of that. And that my love of playing music, I love all the toys and I love all the like sound, but like ultimately it's like the songs and it's singing. So it's like, especially with Fotocrime, it's like all the sounds are me. It's like all my songs. So it's like, if I'm playing to a partial backing track, that doesn't feel disingenuous to me, because that's my fucking music. I made that shit, and every note you're hearing on stage is something I made. Some of it I'm making in the moment. And ultimately it's about like performing, to me, is about like singing and expressing it in that way. Like the show is almost more about singing to me, while like recording is more about playing the instruments, if that makes sense. And like, so yeah, the transition has been not that weird, but it's definitely interesting and it's different, man. Like I think each thing you got to learn more. And I've found that like the more I have going on stage that I have to do, the more like elements and functions, the more I enjoy the show, because I get out of my head more, and I'm not worrying about like, are people enjoying it? Like, what's the mix like? I'm more like, okay, I got to play the guitar and I got to hit this light and I got to hit this keyboard note. And like, and even like in like the artifice of Fotocrime, like the sunglasses, I don't have to worry about like, I can look at my guitar and I don't feel self-conscious of like, oh, I'm staring at my guitar the whole time. I don't feel like I have to engage, or I don't like, I would see so many photos of myself singing in Coliseum where my eyes were always closed and my face was scrunched. And as like a self-conscious person, I'm like, oh, I hate that. And then like the sunglasses just give you this like this blank thing. Like one of the, you know, so sorry, this is like rambling, but like,
No,
you know,
no, that's interesting actually, because like, yeah, I mean, all that stuff I think is really interesting.
you know, like in Cool Hand Luke, the like, he's not the warden, but he's the dude they call walking Mephistopheles, like the dude with the shotgun when they're on the chain gang. You know, like in that movie, the dude's got those mirrored sunglasses on, and there's like, I can't remember which character he's some like biblical or God, I can't remember which character he's supposed to represent, like mythically, but like basically the concept is that he has no eyes, you know, and in the end, his glasses come off and he's kind of looks like this. I think he gets shot or something. He's like very defeated and looks very weak and frail. But like up till that point, he's just kind of like impenetrable character. And that was like one of the things that inspired the sunglasses, of just like, I want to be detached from me. I don't want my eyes. I don't want that like connection to me or like my infallibility. Like I want to feel like completely out of myself when I'm making this music. And it really succeeds, man. Like I don't know. Like I'm able to like disconnect and not feel self-conscious for the most part. And like, and that plus all the functions of like, okay, here's the strobe light switch and here's the floodlight switch and here's the fucking, you know, the keyboard and all that kind of stuff. Like it's actually a very similar thing to the Coliseum stuff. It's just not as many amps, you know. I mean, the only thing I do really miss is like, I miss stereo guitar. Like that's the only thing that sonically is hard for me to like give up, is like I run stereo from like mono into a old Boss stereo delay, then stereo from that to a Clone Theory chorus. And like that sound is like my sound, and like just hearing that wide stereo, I miss that, but that's about it.
Yeah, it's funny now that you gave the rundown. I'm like, well, actually, the only thing that you just kind of spread out the function among all these different components instead of it just being amps, like having like, you know, all these amps on stage.
Totally. I mean, it's funny, and I still hate it. Like where I'm still like, I hate setting it up, right? You know, I love using it. Like, you know, I'm like, God, it's like I have a 12 string that Fotocrime toured with a little bit, and like very quickly I'm like, dude, a 12 string is for like, that's for fucking Pink Floyd. Like that's for somebody with a roadie. You know, like tuning 12 strings, and like even if you tune it before the show and you pick it up to play the song, something's going to be out of tune, and they're unforgiving because they have to be in tune with themselves. And so it's funny shit like that. Like I fucking hate that stuff. Like one of my dreams is always to have success so I can do more things. I'm like, God, I'd love to have a cool stage set, and I'd love to like have the lights be more extensive, but not have to be the person that sets them all fucking up, you know? Like, you know, I love all that. Like that's an extension of the design and the art and all that kind of stuff. I would love to do all that shit. Those are the only things that I like really dream of, you know, in terms of like having more growth or opportunity in a show.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I mean, yeah, that's cool that it's like always just making it more of what it already is, you know, like kind of expanding on what you have and growing that way. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's the idea for sure.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Ryan. We've had a pretty epic discussion here.
Absolutely.
It's awesome. It's great, man. And
yeah,
like aside from, you know, being a guest on the show, I really happy to have had a chance to talk to you about a bunch of different stuff, which was cool.
Yeah, it was awesome, man. I loved it. I felt like this was, of all our podcast interviews, I felt like this was one of the more like conversational. Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is back on my own thing here. It's not the one for Gimme Radio. So it's more free form, more, you know, personal, I guess.
Nice.
All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. Take care.
foundations shake and you slumbered like a fool. These times you always falter, these times you turn away. Douse the money with the gasoline as you're waiting for the grave. While we wait for the sky to fall, it's always hell, always hell. While we wait for the exile, it's always hell, always hell. While we wait for the bomb to drop, it's always hell, always hell. It's always, always. Watch an institution break, disassembled at the stroke of noon. Saw them burning on the stake, you believed it still untrue. At these times you always falter, at these times you turn away. Douse yourself in the gasoline as you're waiting for the grave. While we wait for the sky to fall, it's always hell, always hell. While we wait for the bomb to drop, it's always hell, always hell. Drugs. It's all gone wrong for us. Wait for the sky to fall, it's always hell, always hell. While we wait for the exile, it's always hell, always hell. With the demons, with the dogs. While we wait for the sky to fall,